On more than one occasion, a single moment stood between us and global nuclear annihilation. A single Russian officer once stopped World War III by refusing to launch during a false alarm. A U.S. bomber once accidentally dropped a live nuke over North Carolina. And yet, nearly 80 years after Hiroshima, only 9 countries officially possess nuclear weapons. So why aren't there more? Who has the bomb and how did they get it? We'll explain it all on today's episode of The Infographic Show. How every country actually got nuclear weapons. Before anyone else ever dreamed of splitting atoms for mass destruction, the US made it terrifyingly real, and it all started with a letter. In 1939, Albert Einstein co-signed a warning to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. The Nazis were tinkering with uranium. If they figured out how to trigger a chain reaction, they could create a bomb unlike anything the world had seen. And by 1942, the US was all in. The Manhattan Project, a secretive, sprawling mega operation that would burn through nearly $2 billion in World War II-era greenbacks, would fundamentally reshape human history. The project transformed sleepy desert towns and backwater facilities into the nervous system of America's atomic ambitions. Los Alamos in New Mexico became the brain. Oak Ridge in Tennessee enriched uranium. Hanford out in Washington State mass-produced plutonium. These places were so classified that the workers often didn't know what they were working on. Just that it was urgent, important, and dangerous. The science team was a rogues gallery of geniuses. There was J. Robert Oppenheimer, the brooding, brilliant father of the atomic bomb. There was Enrico Fermi, who built the first nuclear reactor. Edward Teller also entered the picture, dreaming up something bigger, the hydrogen bomb. Together, they fused theory with hardware. And 5:30 a.m. on July 16, 1945, in the desert near Alamogordo, these atomic pioneers watched the sky ignite with the light of 1,000 suns. Codenamed Trinity, the first nuclear detonation in history, turned sand into glass, vaporized a steel tower, and left scientists stunned. Oppenheimer muttered a now infamous line from the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." 3 weeks later, that line would no longer be poetry. On August 6, the US dropped Little Boy on Hiroshima, instantly killing tens of thousands. On August 9th, Fat Man obliterated Nagasaki. In the days that followed, the death toll soared, over 200,000 civilians dead from the blasts, radiation, and aftermath. Japan surrendered and World War II ended, but something darker had begun. For the first time in history, one nation held all the power to erase entire populations with a single weapon. Across the globe, reactions ranged from victorious euphoria to stunned moral reckoning. The Soviets, watching uneasily from afar, immediately stepped up their own program. Scientists who had once cheered at Trinity now questioned what they had unleashed. The nuclear genie was out of the bottle, and it was never going back in. By 1950, the US had almost 300 warheads, like a doomsday factory gone into overdrive. The logic was simple: the best way to avoid being nuked was to be ready to nuke back, harder. This attitude gave birth to the doctrine of deterrence, or as one Cold War strategist put it, "If you kill us, we'll kill you right back, twice." Then came the next leap. On November 1, 1952, the US tested Ivy Mike, the world's first hydrogen bomb, a device not just splitting atoms but fusing them, like a man-made star exploding in the Pacific. The blast yield was around 10.4 megatons, or 700 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Entire islands vanished beneath mushroom clouds. Mankind had leveled up its ability to end civilization. Over the decades, the US nuclear arsenal ballooned into the thousands, peaking at over 31,000 warheads during the Cold War. Treaties and budget cuts eventually brought that number down. But even now, the US still fields roughly 3,700 nuclear warheads. That's enough to destroy the world several times over, because in the nuclear age, once is never enough. If the United States was the first to unleash the atom, the Soviet Union was not far behind. Joseph Stalin didn't like being second to anything, especially when the Americans suddenly had the power to vaporize entire cities. So in the wake of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Soviet dictator ordered a crash program to build a bomb of his own, and Stalin wanted it fast. Igor Kurchatov, a shaggy-haired physicist known as the Beard, was tapped to lead the Soviet nuclear effort. But Kurchatov didn't start from scratch. He had help from an unlikely source: espionage. While American scientists celebrated their breakthroughs, a few were also slipping secrets to the Soviets. Most famously, Klaus Fuchs, a brilliant German-born physicist working in the heart of the Manhattan Project, handed over detailed blueprints. David Greenglass, an army machinist and brother to another notorious spy, Ethel Rosenberg, did the same. Together, they gave Stalin the shortcut that he sought. Still, the Soviet bomb wasn't cheap. The program devoured resources, nearly 25% of the entire Soviet GDP for several years. Cities were starved so labs could run. This was science on a war footing. Stalin wasn't building a deterrent, he was building leverage. On August 29, 1949, in the barren steppes of Semipalatinsk, Kazakhstan, the Soviets detonated RDS-1, nicknamed First Lightning. From the outside, it looked eerily familiar, and that's because it was a near-exact copy of the American Fat Man design. But the world didn't care how original it was, all they realized was that the US no longer had a monopoly on Armageddon. Washington was stunned. The test had come years earlier than most analysts predicted. In the blink of a mushroom cloud, the Cold War turned hot, ideologically, militarily, and scientifically. And so the arms race began. The Soviets didn't rely on American blueprints for long. By 1953, just 4 years after RDS-1, the USSR tested its first thermonuclear bomb. It was rougher and bulkier than the US counterpart, but it worked. From there, Soviet engineers got creative, building bombs big enough to trigger literal earthquakes. In 1961, the USSR detonated the infamous Tsar Bomba, the most powerful nuclear weapon ever created, with a yield of 50 to 58 megatons. That is 3,000 times more powerful than the Hiroshima blast. It shattered windows almost 500 miles away. Throughout the Cold War, Soviet stockpiles ballooned. By the mid-1980s, the USSR held the largest nuclear arsenal in history, roughly 45,000 warheads aimed at NATO, China, and sometimes even themselves in a paranoid contingency plan. It was mutually assured destruction in its purest form. Two superpowers locked in a staring contest, fingers on the button. After the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, much of that arsenal was dismantled or decommissioned. But the bombs didn't vanish. Russia, as the USSR's legal successor, kept the lion's share. Today it holds an estimated 4,300 nuclear warheads. That's more than any other nation on Earth. During World War II, British scientists played a key role in the Manhattan Project. They shared labs, secrets, and tea with their American counterparts, contributing critical breakthroughs in nuclear theory and weapons design. It was a model of wartime cooperation until it wasn't. In 1946, the U.S. passed the McMahon Act, which slammed the door shut on transatlantic atomic collaboration. Suddenly, even trusted allies were cut off. But Britain wasn't about to be sidelined in this new atomic age. Prime Minister Clement Attlee's Labour government made a bold, controversial decision. The UK would develop an independent nuclear deterrent no matter the cost. Over £100 million in 1950s money was funneled into secret labs and weapons testing zones across the Commonwealth. On October 3, 1952, under the code name Operation Hurricane, the UK detonated its first nuclear weapon aboard a ship off the coast of Montebello Islands in Australia. The blast tore through the vessel and confirmed what British officials had hoped to prove to the world: Britain was still a great power. The headlines were celebratory, but the subtext was strategic. An independent bomb meant independent leverage, even in a world increasingly dominated by superpowers. By the late 1950s, shared interests and shared enemies brought the US and the UK back together. In 1958, the two signed the Mutual Defense Agreement, restoring nuclear cooperation on terms that the Americans controlled. Britain gained access to US weapon systems and delivery platforms, including the sea-based Polaris missiles and later the Trident program, submarine-launched ballistic missiles that remain the backbone of the UK's nuclear force today. Modern Britain maintains a relatively small but sophisticated arsenal, around 225 warheads, delivered exclusively via Vanguard-class submarines on continuous patrol. It is a lean, silent threat meant to ensure that if anyone tries to erase the UK, they won't go quietly. If Britain went nuclear to stay relevant, France did it to make a point. No one embodied this nuclear ambition more than Charles de Gaulle, the towering figure of post-war French politics. De Gaulle saw atomic weapons as more than mere tools of deterrence. To him, they were an expression of identity. He spoke often of a proud, sovereign, unbending France, and no proud nation in his view should rely on another's trigger finger for its survival. Thus was born the Force de Frappe, the idea of an independent French nuclear strike force. While British nukes were tucked safely under America's nuclear umbrella, France wanted its own umbrella altogether, and to maybe sell a few branded copies while they were at it. U.S. pressure to fall in line only hardened de Gaulle's resolve. If the Cold War turned hot, France would defend itself on its own terms. On February 13, 1960, a towering plume of smoke and fire punched into the Algerian sky. Beneath it, the French had just detonated Jerboise Bleu, their first atomic bomb. The yield was deafening, 4 times stronger than Hiroshima, and remains the largest first test ever conducted by a nation. France hadn't just joined the nuclear club, it had kicked down the door. Like its nuclear-armed peers, French atomic testing was incredibly expensive, its program ranking 3rd in overall cost behind only the US and USSR. De Gaulle didn't care. He wasn't buying bombs, he was buying prestige. That same year, France refused to integrate its nukes into NATO's command structure, and by 1966, de Gaulle pulled France entirely out of NATO's military command, insisting that France, not Washington, would decide when and how its weapons should be used. France maintains an independent targeting and launch system to this day, fielding about 290 nuclear warheads launched via submarines and air-based systems. It's a nuclear force built for clarity rather than chaos. Somewhere across the world in the early 1950s, China and the Soviet Union were supposed to be besties. Mao Zedong's newly established People's Republic received technical assistance and training from Moscow as part of its post-war reconstruction, and Stalin approved initial help on atomic research. Soviet scientists advised Chinese engineers, and equipment shipments flowed into Beijing. For a time, it looked like China might be fast-tracked to the bomb, but then came the Sino-Soviet split. By 1959, relations between Nikita Khrushchev and Chairman Mao had soured. Ideological differences, border tensions, and personal insults turned the communist bromance into a bitter rivalry. Khrushchev abruptly cut off all nuclear support, even recalling blueprints and advisors mid-project. It was a political gut punch. Mao, furious but undeterred, declared that China would develop the bomb on its own. That determination became reality on October 16, 1964, when a mushroom cloud erupted over the Lopnur test site in China's remote Xinjiang desert. The test, dubbed Project 596, was named after the month and year the Soviets had pulled out, and it was both a technical achievement and a political message. Just 3 years later, in 1967, China tested its first hydrogen bomb faster than any other nation had managed. It wasn't the biggest or the cleanest, but it proved a point. China had graduated. Mao, of course, had a characteristically unhinged take on nuclear warfare. He once shrugged off the American arsenal by pointing out that China had 600 million people and plenty of land, more than enough to absorb a few atomic strikes. He even joked that if the US bombs were powerful enough to blow a hole through the Earth, it would be a big deal for the solar system, but not the universe as a whole. To Mao, nukes weren't the ultimate weapon, willpower was. He famously declared that while the Americans had planes plus the A-bomb, China had millet plus rifles, and that would be enough to win a war. It was equal parts terrifying and absurd. Judging by the familiar features of conventional warfare today, he might have been right. But while the US and USSR spiraled into an arms race of overwhelming stockpiles, China adopted a different nuclear philosophy: minimal deterrence. Instead of thousands of warheads, China has focused on just enough nukes to guarantee second strike capability. In 1964, China also announced its no first-use policy, a rare stance among nuclear powers. They claimed that they would never strike first, only retaliate. Skeptics doubted their sincerity, but the policy endures in Chinese doctrine even today. As of now, China is believed to maintain around 600 nuclear warheads, although exact numbers are secret. What is known is that its delivery systems, intercontinental ballistic missiles or ICBMs, submarines, and mobile launchers are rapidly modernizing. The world's most populous country may have arrived late to the nuclear party, but it showed up with enough firepower and enough ideological swagger to change the game. Few nuclear rivalries are as personal or as perilous as the one between India and Pakistan. Born from the same violent partition in 1947, the two nations have fought multiple wars, engaged in constant skirmishes, and traded barbed rhetoric for decades. It was only a matter of time before they added nuclear weapons to the mix. India's nuclear ambitions began under the suave and visionary Homi Bhabha, who built a civilian nuclear program with dreams of energy independence and technological prestige. But beneath the white coats and chalkboards, India just didn't want to be bullied by China, by Pakistan, or by anyone. On May 18, 1974, India conducted its first nuclear test under the codename Smiling Buddha. India insisted the device was a peaceful nuclear explosive, a bizarre euphemism meant to soften the geopolitical fallout. The bomb had blown a crater in the Rajasthan desert, but apparently it was in the spirit of nonviolence. The world didn't buy it. The test triggered a wave of condemnation, and India found itself slapped with sanctions and international isolation. But to Indian leaders, it was worth it. Their 1962 war with China had left scars, and they weren't going to be caught empty-handed ever again. Across the border, India's test set off alarm bells and egos. Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto vowed to get a nuclear weapon, and that is exactly what Pakistan did. they turned to A.Q. Khan, a metallurgist with a flair for uranium enrichment and black market deals. Khan allegedly stole centrifuge designs from a Dutch lab and brought them back to Pakistan, where he became a national hero, and later a notorious nuclear smuggler. Rumors swirled of Chinese assistance behind the scenes, but Pakistan insisted it had gone nuclear under its own steam. The race was on. Pakistan didn't test a bomb in the 70s or the 80s, but everyone knew it was coming. In May 1998, India broke its long silence with a bang. 5 tests conducted over 2 days in the Pokhran Desert, announcing itself as a full-fledged nuclear power. It was both a flex and a warning aimed at Pakistan and Beijing alike. 17 days later, Pakistan responded with 6 tests of its own in the Changai Hills. Both nations were immediately condemned by the international community and hit hard by a wave of economic sanctions from the US, Japan, and others. But the regional balance of power had shifted permanently. The subcontinent was now officially nuclear and perpetually on edge. Unlike their Cold War rivals, India and Pakistan have actually traded fire while possessing nuclear weapons. Skirmishes in Kargil in 1999 and clashes over Kashmir have pushed them to the brink more than once, with global powers watching nervously every time. Today, India is estimated to hold around 180 nuclear warheads, while Pakistan fields about 170. Both maintain no first-use postures, officially at least. But given the speed and volatility of past crises, many feared that if any 2 nuclear nations were to actually use the bomb in a war, these would be the ones. If nuclear weapons were a reality show, North Korea would be the wild card contestant who shows up late, eats all the snacks, and then threatens to blow up the house. North Korea's obsession with nukes goes way back. With a little help from the Soviet Union, they began constructing a nuclear reactor at Yongbyon, claiming that it was for peaceful purposes. But Pyongyang was always playing the long game. In 1994, facing a full-blown nuclear crisis on the Korean peninsula, the US and North Korea signed the Agreed Framework. But in 2003, North Korea rage-quit the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT. And then, on October 9, 2006, North Korea finally did it. Its first nuclear test, deep beneath the mountains of Pyongyang. The world held its breath. The seismic data came in, and it was underwhelming. Analysts estimated a yield of less than a kiloton. People weren't so sure if it was a bomb or a very angry, abrupt earthquake. Still, the message was loud and clear. The UN Security Council passed Resolution 1718, slapping sanctions on luxury goods, weapons, tech, and whatever else the regime might value. But North Korea didn't blink, they doubled down. Between 2006 and 2017, North Korea conducted 6 nuclear tests, each more powerful than the last. The 2017 detonation was claimed to be a hydrogen bomb, and the blast shook seismographs around the world. And as if that weren't enough, they also rolled out a fleet of ICBMs capable of reaching anywhere from Seoul to Seattle. Today, estimates suggest North Korea possesses between 40 and 50 nuclear warheads. But not every nuclear story ends in a mushroom cloud. Some countries just walk the tightrope of suspicion. Others build the bomb and then quietly dismantle it. And a few just flirt with the idea, hoping the world's watching. Of all the world's nuclear powers, Israel is the only one that refuses to admit it has any nuclear weapons, while also refusing to say that it doesn't. In the 1960s, Israel built a nuclear reactor at Dimona, deep in the Negev desert. Officially, it was for research. Unofficially, it was heavily guarded. The US knew what was up, but it turned a blind eye because, well, Cold War alliances were naturally pretty complicated. Israel's strategy is called nuclear ambiguity. Don't test, don't tell, but let the implication linger. If the enemies think you have nukes, it's almost as good as actually having them. Then, in 1986, a former technician named Mordecai Vanunu blew the lid off the program, leaking photos and documents to the British press. Israel kidnapped him, tried him in secret, and sentenced him to 18 years in prison. The bomb stayed in the vault and the world moved on. Today, Israel is believed to possess 80 to 90 nuclear warheads, all unofficial, unacknowledged, and suspected to be a low estimate of reality. South Africa is the only country to have built nuclear weapons, 6 of them, and then voluntarily dismantled its entire arsenal. The program was born during the apartheid era, hidden from the world, but between 1989 and 1991, as the regime crumbled and democracy approached, South Africa boxed up its bombs. It didn't want nuclear weapons in the hands of a new government that it couldn't control. For once, disarmament was real and preemptive. Libya got close but never quite crossed the line. Dictator Muammar Gaddafi spent years playing with centrifuges and buying black market tech from A.Q. Khan, and then came the US invasion of Iraq in 2003. Seeing Saddam pulled out of a spider hole changed Gaddafi's mind. He gave up the program in exchange for sanctions relief and better PR. Then there were the post-Soviet states, Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan. When the USSR collapsed in 1991, they suddenly found themselves sitting on thousands of nuclear weapons. But by 1996, all three had returned their warheads to Russia under international agreements in exchange for security guarantees. The nuclear future isn't just about who has the bomb, but who might want one next. Iran remains the most debated and current case. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, deal in 2015 temporarily paused its enrichment activities, but after the U.S. withdrawal in 2018, tensions skyrocketed. Tehran reiterates its program is peaceful, but then on June 22, 2025, the U.S., in a bold move dubbed Operation Midnight Hammer, joined Israeli strikes on Iran's Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan nuclear facilities. The Pentagon now estimates the damage has delayed Iran's nuclear program by 1 to 2 years, though UN inspectors and U.S. intelligence warn key centrifuges and uranium stockpiles may be hidden or intact. Tehran, calling the strikes a heinous act and a violation of international law, warns of unprecedented chaos and vowed retaliation. Saudi Arabia has made noises about developing its own bomb, especially if Iran gets one. Some say it's a bluff, others say it's just waiting for the right supplier. Meanwhile, Japan, South Korea, and Brazil all have the technology to build nukes fast should politics shift. In other words, the next member of the nuclear club could be one crisis away. At the height of the Cold War in the 1980s, the world was armed with 70,000 nuclear warheads, enough to destroy civilization many times over. Today, that number is down to about 13,400, which is still apocalyptic. And the United States and Russia still control 90% of them because certain habits die hard. The rest are scattered among a small club of nations. By 2023, there were just over 2,000 total tests worldwide. Around 1,000 of them were American, 715 Soviet, and the rest divided up between France, China, UK, India, Pakistan, and North Korea. But beyond the math, the real story of nuclear weapons is why countries built them. And here's where it gets personal. For the US, it was about ending the World War with a statement no one could ignore. For the Soviets, it was a necessary evil to avoid becoming the next Hiroshima. For India and Pakistan, it was a sibling rivalry with radioactive stakes. For North Korea, survival. For France and China, prestige and autonomy. For Israel, insurance against existential erasure. Every new country that joins the nuclear club lowers the bar for the next. Technology spreads, blueprints leak, and rogue scientists cash in. The harder we try to contain the bomb, the more it seems inevitable, and it's not just about states anymore. What keeps nuclear analysts awake at night isn't another superpower standoff, it's a dirty bomb in a shipping container. Cyber attacks on nuclear launch systems, or a rogue general. The idea of space-based weapons or AI-driven retaliation systems isn't mere science fiction, it is the next chapter. Even the old Cold War idea of deterrence starts to wobble when your adversary isn't a rational state, but a faction, a hacker, or a religious zealot with access to enriched uranium. And despite treaties, taboos, and televised summits, one truth remains: no democratic nuclear power has ever voluntarily disarmed. The bomb becomes more than strategy, it becomes mythology, a symbol of national pride. Even when it's never used, it shapes borders and budgets. So where does that leave us? In a world with fewer nukes but far deadlier ones, where diplomacy runs hot, alliances wobble, and the rules of the game keep shifting, nuclear weapons no longer promise peace. But not having them might mean you're just a spectator at a very dangerous game. So now you know how every country ended up with nukes, but what if you were caught in not one but 2 nuclear blasts? Watch the only man to survive 2 nuclear bombs, or click on this video instead.